To hell with the date on your birth certificate. Let's talk about what we have in common across generations. Life, sex, and tech at any age. Welcome to Age Blind with Nancy Shenker.
Hey, boys and girls. Welcome to Age Blind, where the date on your birth certificate is meaningless because we talk about sex, life, and tech at all ages and the things we have in common. So today's episode is titled Sexy Summer Fun as part of my series of Fun Hot Summer. So all of our guests this summer are going to be talking mostly about fun things. Maybe we'll talk about cures for mosquito bites or what to do if you get sand in your vagina. But for the most part, it will be upbeat, it'll be fun, it'll be hot, it'll be frank, and it'll be funny. And Ashley Manta is all of those things. She was on a previous episode talking specifically about cannabis, but she is also a sexuality expert. And so I'm going to let her do most of the talking today, just because I think her career is fascinating and she has so much to talk about. So Ashley, introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about how you got into the industry, and tell us about the book that you wrote and why you wrote it.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Manta. I am a certified sexologist and award-winning sex coach. I am a certified body sex facilitator. I was lucky enough to be mentored by the late, great Dr. Betty Dodson. I've been doing sexuality education since 2007. I got my start doing sexual violence prevention education, victim advocacy, and rape crisis counseling. And then I pivoted because that is all very important but heavy burnout work. And so I got a job at Planned Parenthood doing reproductive health education and assistance within the clinic. I am very pro-choice and really want people to feel empowered in their body and their reproductive choices. And then I moved to California and I became a phone sex operator. And I learned so much about people's desires and normalizing turn-ons, and developed a lot of great relationships with people in the adult industry, as well as the toy and lube industry. And so I've gotten to really kind of run the spectrum of the sexuality professional field. And then in 2019, I was approached by Mary Jane, which is a cannabis media company. I had gotten some notoriety as a sex and cannabis expert. And they invited me to write book two of their 3-book series called The CBD Solution, Sex. And so I wrote all about how cannabis can contribute to a full, healthy, and enjoyable sex life.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I grew up in the 1960s. My dad was a gynecologist, so there was probably more sex talk at the dinner table than there was in most households. But it was also an era where sex ed was very clinical. There was no talk about enjoyment or passion. I remember one of my favorite novels when I was a young teenager was Marjorie Morningstar, about a woman in the 50s building her career, and she went to the gynecologist to get a pessary, which I guess was a form of birth control back then. But it was in the early days of the sexual revolution. But now I'm finding that I'm 69 years old, is that so many of my peers, because we grew up in that era, still have this like tittering, dirty perception of sex. And it's really, really important that we normalize it and talk about sexual dysfunction and sexual challenges and sexual facts across the ages. So my website, Nancy AF, one of the F's stands for factual. And that's really key, is giving people the facts about sexuality. So you talked a little bit about your time as a sex phone operator. So what are some of the other kind of interesting, unusual, eye-opening experiences you've had in your career that, jobs that people may think are perverse, but are actually really helpful to society? You talked about violence prevention, which is key. Anything else?
Yeah, I worked at the Pleasure Chest in West Hollywood as a manager of their website. So I was helping to sell sex toys, both online and in person at the store. And what I really liked about Pleasure Chest is the operations manager and the creative director were both sex educators. And so they really were very focused that all of the staff be incredibly well versed in being gender neutral, in inclusivity, not just assuming everyone who comes in is straight and cisgender, in really talking about toys for body parts instead of assuming what someone might enjoy. And then, of course, being kink inclusive. And so it was really a great education for me. I learned so much about the different toys that are available on the market and the importance of lube. And I was also able to teach classes there. So that was one of my favorite jobs before I went into business for myself.
That's awesome. And for those readers who are still, living in the sexual dark ages, everybody has proclivities. Some people like lima beans. I don't. I forced myself to eat peas last night because they're healthy, but I cooked them in the air fryer until they got extra crispy. So we all have our tastes. And the same way we have tastes in our refrigerators and in our reading styles and our TV watching styles. People have tastes in their sexual styles. And that doesn't mean that they are perverse or that they're weird or that, they had something terrible happen in their childhood. It just means that that's how they like their body to operate. I love
Mhm.
Pilates. Some people hate it and love to run. So our bodies are very complex instruments. And I always draw parallels because I love tech between the human body and a circuit board in a computer, that everybody is wired a little bit differently. So no judgment.
Absolutely. Everything is normal. That's one of my favorite quotes from Dr. Emily Nagoski, who wrote the book Come As You Are, which if you have a vulva or play with people who have them, highly recommend reading that book. And, the way that we shame and stigmatize people for whatever their sexual interests may be is really just indicative of this very puritanical patriarchal culture that we live in that says there is one right way to do things. And it's typically the Judeo-Christian heteronormative way of doing things. And it's well, there's a lot more paint in the paintbrush than just one color.
Oh, and there's still a lot of men out there who will say, I love variety in the bedroom. I love different women. I like to cheat. I'm poly, but I don't want my girlfriend to be those things. So, and that's, still exists today, that, there are a lot of men of my generation who think that ENM, ethical non-monogamy, is creepy. It's just not everybody's flavor. Again, someone may like rum raisin and and I could tell I'm hungry. I haven't had breakfast yet. That all my analogies are food analogies, but it really is all about taste. That's why, when people judge about cannabis, I'm like, well, do you drink? It's yes. How much do you drink? Oh, I pound down, 2 or 3 old fashions. Okay, so why is that any different from better than my consuming cannabis to have better sleep or relax or ease anxiety? So in the sexual world, is there such a thing as boundaries? Or is it really, as we used to say back in my day, different strokes for different folks?
Well, I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. There are absolutely boundaries, and boundaries vary from person to person. So what my boundaries are, and boundaries are also typically around how you're treated. I might say, I'm not comfortable with you raising your voice to me when we're having a conversation. And if you do, I'm going to leave. That's a boundary. Saying that I kink, but not, I don't know, tantra, that's not a boundary. That's just a preference.
Cool. I love that. So know your preferences, know your boundaries. And I love what you just said. Do you have kind of a guidebook of how to speak up if something is happening sexually that you're not comfortable with? Is there a certain lexicon that you recommend?
I mean, I think negotiating in plain English is the clearest way of doing it. So if something happens that you're that didn't work for me, just say, that's not working for me. I'd like to do something else. Or no, I'm not comfortable with that. Let's do something else. Or please stop. You can really be that straightforward. You don't have to say some combination of magic words to convince someone that they're doing something wrong. You could just say, that's not working for me.
And what if a woman is saying that and the man she's with gets angry and says, well, I haven't ever had any other complaints, or as a sexual violence counselor, how do you know when the, speaking up could potentially result in anger or violence? I realize it's a pretty heavy question, but I do think a lot of our listeners put up with stuff that they don't, and we'll talk about in a minute about compatibility and mismatch and sexual desire and function. But, how do you know when something is going into the danger zone?
I mean, that is a very complex question and it's very situational. But what I would say is those things don't always happen completely in a vacuum. People don't go from zero to becoming sexual predators. A lot of times in the early dating, you might just see things like them being really domineering about where you go to dinner, or like, I want you to wear this thing, or like just like little controlling behaviors that you're like, Or if you say, oh, I'm full, I don't want to have any more dinner. And they're like, oh, come on, just like one more bite. Just, oh, don't you want dessert? Like, and they push against your stated preference. That's a red flag.
I
And
was just having this conversation the other day because I don't eat sugar. And if a man is trying to stick his fork in my mouth with a piece of cheesecake on it, that to me is a tell. I'm like, no,
it's
I told
definitely
you
a
that I don't
tell.
eat sugar. I mean, I've thought about lying and just telling people I'm diabetic, but
I
I
mean,
don't.
you shouldn't have to lie to have people respect your preferences. And that's the thing. I think we are not nearly discerning enough about who we share our time and our bodies with. Like, the first time someone pushes on my boundary, especially a sexual boundary, is the last time they push on that boundary. Like, they're done. You auditioned and you failed. You're not getting a call back. And I will get up and leave. Like, when I was younger and I've had sexual traumas in my life, I did endure touch. I endured unwanted sexual situations because of politeness, because of how we're socialized, especially as, women. And I don't do that anymore. And the first time that you start to feel uncomfortable or unsafe, or like, ooh, this is just not a situation that I feel like I'm being fully respected, get the fuck out. Like, don't screw around. Don't wait. Don't like hope that you misinterpret it. Just leave.
Yeah. And it's very interesting because, I think that, and it could be men and women who can be predators. We're not just man bashing
For
here.
sure.
I have a friend who went on a date with a woman who wanted to take him home and he didn't want to go. And she like shamed him in front of the whole restaurant. I mean, it was, I remember he was kind of traumatized. He was like, you mean you don't want this? Like, really? Because she saw that as the ultimate rejection. But what I found, Ashley, is in my 20s, I probably put up with stuff because of fear and weakness. I mean, not anybody who knows me can't imagine that I wouldn't speak up for myself, but there are times when I didn't. And then I found that even though I was pretty specific and powerful from my, 30s to my 60s, there's this kind of new thing where older men feel like older women should be grateful that they're willing to have sex with them. And my line is, nobody gets into my corner office without an interview process and an appointment. Like, I am very, very protective of my vagina these days, as it should be. Like, it's not, as you said, people, and again, it all depends on what you're into. Some people love multiple partners as long as they're being honest about it and not transmitting STIs. It's all good. I'm not here to be the sex police. Speaking, there's a great segue to the next topic. I discovered recently, because I was looking for AI to create an image of a buffet of vaginas, and it would not, the AI would not acknowledge the word vagina. And I had slightly better luck when I put in female genitalia, but I kept getting these warning messages that it was inappropriate content. So, and I got the same thing from LinkedIn, and it was not anything particularly graphic or racy. It was just a body part. So, have you found in your marketing that you've sometimes been censored when you're trying to market your book or talk about what you do?
Oh, nonstop. That's an epidemic in the sexuality professional field. Mostly due to some legislation that was passed back in 2018 called SESTA and FOSTA, which was passed under the guise of like trying to stop child sex trafficking, which
Right.
is a really noble goal, but also in there is a lot of like censorship language. And basically it says that internet companies are responsible for everything that's on their site. And so if it's porn and someone who's under 18 views it, then that's a problem. And the internet company, the website, can be held liable for that. The problem is that the language in that bill didn't really distinguish between porn and sex education. And that's a very conservative point of view. Like, talking about sex in any capacity is obscene and immoral and wrong. And so we shouldn't do it. And it's all porn. And anyone who's curious about it is a sex addict, which is like nonsense. But I think also the language that we use, like, I hear you saying vagina. Vagina is the birth canal. Like, one of Betty Dodson's like big pet peeves is we always call it a vagina and not a vulva. The vulva is all of the important stuff. It's the labia, it's the clitoris, which is like the pleasure center of the entire genital region. The vagina is just where blood comes out and possibly babies, if that's your choice. But like, we focus just on that one specific part as the whole thing. But you wouldn't call your face your throat, would you? Like,
no, how could I not know this? If my father weren't dead, I would like call him up and say, Dad, like, what the fuck? Like, you know,
it's patriarchy. We call that area the one part that people with penises are most interested in penetrating. So that's the focal point. And Freud talking about how clitoral orgasms are immature and vaginal orgasms are the only proper way to experience pleasure, which is nonsense because less than 15% of people with vulvas can orgasm from vaginal penetration alone. Like, it's just staggering the like way that patriarchy seeps into every aspect of our lives, especially in language.
Oh, for sure. And I had a guest on earlier this year who's a sex toy marketer. She is a reseller for different brands of sex toys. And she threw out a statistic of how many nerve endings are in that region. And the fact that as we get older, the same way our hips may feel different, or our eyesight feels different, or our hearing is different, that our pleasure sources, our pleasure points may change. And it's really important to constantly be upgrading, upskilling our vulvas as we get older.
And just being aware of them, really. Like, that can change even where you are in your cycle. Like where your hormones are at any, so that could be from the time that you're 12 or 13 through, your entire lifespan can change where things light up for you and where your pleasure centers are. So it's really important to have an ongoing relationship with your body and your self-pleasure practices so that you can articulate that information to your partner who cannot read your mind.
Yep. So the same way, since we're talking about summer fun, the same way you have a favorite place on the beach to lay out your blanket, you should also know the favorite places on your body that give you pleasure and not be embarrassed to explore, work with a sex coach, talk to your close friends about it. When my girlfriends and I get together, we have a ball talking about our body parts, and as it should be. So we talked a little bit before this podcast recording about desire discrepancy, which can occur at any age, but the reality is, as our bodies change, as our hormone levels change, as our relationships change, we may end up in what's called a desire discrepancy. So if you can just explain to our listeners and our viewers what that is and whether it can be resolved.
Absolutely. So as a sex coach, I see private clients, and a lot of the clients that I see are couples. And I see this across genders, across sexual orientations, and across age groups. Like, this is not any one thing that causes it, but typically in a given coupled relationship, one partner has greater sexual interest than the other. And that can be situational. That can be, for a couple of months during a stressful period, or it can be kind of a relationship long thing that comes up. And it is absolutely something that can be worked through. A lot of it comes down to two big things. One is reframing what sex is, because especially in heterosexual dynamics, there's a lot of focus on penetration as like, that's what sex is. And if we're not having penetrative sex, then we're not having sex. And I think that's fundamentally flawed and absolutely false. So there's that piece, and reframing that and talking about like, let's discuss pleasure. Let's discuss, mutual enjoyment. And that kind of leads to the second thing, which is Peggy Kleinplatz is a sex researcher who wrote an amazing book called Magnificent Sex. And she interviewed thousands and thousands of couples of all ages and genders and asked them about their magnificent sexual experiences and what makes sex extraordinary for them. And what she found were 8 key components of magnificent sex. Orgasm is not among them,
Interesting.
which is really, really important. I think we have a very societally focused like obsession with orgasm as the goal of any sexual interaction. What she actually found was pleasure is the most important thing. And pleasure and orgasm are not always the same. And so in her research, like people who have what is traditionally called like low desire is often actually a very understandable reaction to mediocre sex. You don't crave sex that you don't enjoy. And because there's so much like emphasis on penetration and so much emphasis on orgasm, sometimes people who have, not as much enjoyment in their sexual experiences are like, you know what, that's just too much work. Fuck it. I'd rather do the dishes. I'd rather, watch reality TV. I'd rather go on a vacation.
That could be pleasurable. Like you're craving pleasure, you're craving intimacy, you're craving closeness.
Yes.
But you don't necessarily craving semen. Like
exactly.
That may not be the end goal.
Right. Yeah. A lot of people can have incredible, fulfilling sexual experiences and not have an orgasm or not ejaculate. And that's okay. And we really need to normalize that.
Very cool. So desire discrepancy, thanks. You gave a great definition. And yes, boys and girls, it can be worked on. Just get a sex coach. So you've also thrown out some really great resources. So what I'm going to encourage our listeners and our viewers to do is to subscribe at nancyaf.com. And I will send you a cheat sheet of all of our summer guests and their recommended reading and viewing material. So that's like a bonus that will only go to subscribers. So I can't help but throw in a little marketing there for my brand. So is there anything else that we didn't touch on, Ashley, that you'd like our viewers to know? I think this has been tremendous. This is like better sex education than I ever got in junior high school or high school. And I mean, I know a lot about the medical aspects of sex, having lived in a house with a OBGYN, but it's the emotional and intellectual side of it that I still feel sometimes like I'm a novice. Although all of my guy friends now come to me to help them understand some of the terms. They're like, what is cuckolding? What is BDSM? What is swinging? So I've become like the Irma Bombeck of sex hint tips, although I could never do what you do just because I never went down that path, but you are truly amazing, Ashley.
Oh, well, thank you. I think if there's one thing that I want people to take away, especially for their summer fun, sexy times, is the real importance of lube. A lot of people think that lube is just something for older people or just something that you maybe need sometimes. But I am of the opinion, and my sexuality colleagues agree with me, that better sex is wetter sex. And very often, especially people with vulvas, do not produce adequate lubrication for the duration of a sexual experience, especially a penetrative sexual experience. So have lube nearby and good lube, not lube that you bought at Walgreens or, on Amazon. Like go to a sex shop or go to one online, get a company like Sliquid or Pure or Sutil. Like those are all great lube brands that are fantastic and they are free from irritating chemicals.
Yeah.
Stay away from shit like KY jelly. That is nasty, nasty stuff. It's like
I
pouring
know.
battery acid on your genitals.
Thing that I learned at a very early age from having a gynecologist father is like, watch what you put in there because, you wouldn't eat something that tasted like it was spoiled. So why would you put something chemical and full of crap into your body? You just wouldn't.
Very exposed mucosal membranes. Yeah, don't do that to yourself.
No, it can be very dangerous. And I know, we said we were going to kind of keep away from the downside of aging, but the reality is that as women get older, our wall thins out and sex could be more painful, and a combination of hormone replacement therapy and topical and lube.
Lube is so important. Vaginal estrogen is like everyone's secret weapon. We should all be on vaginal estrogen pretty much from our 30s beyond.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because, the TV stations are filled with ads for, I have a lactose intolerance, so I take this drug before I eat dairy, or ate too much and I have gas, so I'm now going to eat some Tums or whatever. But you don't really see a whole lot. You see a lot of erectile dysfunction ads,
Certainly see lots of that.
but you're not really seeing as much for us ladies. So let's normalize that shit.
Absolutely.
That can be my new tagline. Let's normalize that shit.
I love it.
And that is what I'm planning on doing this summer, is taking a very broad look at what summer fun means. Back when we were kids, it was chasing the ice cream truck down the street or going to Jones Beach with our friends, but we can still have summer fun as adults. And there's a lot of nasty stuff going on in the world. So let's have our summer fun where we can get it, including fun in bed. So Ashley, if people want to reach you, what is the best way to find you?
Best way to find me is my website, ashleymanta.com. You can find me on Instagram at Cannasexual. And then I also have online courses that you can purchase and download and watch at your leisure at elevatedintimacy.com.
Love that. Love that. So elevate your intimacy this summer. Thank you, Ashley. You're a tremendous guest. Enjoy your summer, boys and girls. Peace out.
Yes.